Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Catalyst webinar, Ready to Loop and Making Transition to Circular Economy. We have our guests from Technical University of Denmark, Tim and Daniela with us, and they will be talking about Ready to Loop methodology, which is built on research and experience from different projects. And I give the floor to Tim and Daniela to talk about those projects and talk more about the methodology.
Thank you, Syed, and good day to everybody. Nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation to be at this webinar today, or to present our project at the webinar today. And by way of introduction, we're going to tell you about the project called Ready2LOOP, and we'll introduce briefly to you what the project is in a few seconds. But first of all, maybe an introduction to ourselves. Daniela, would you like to start?
Of course, and I'm the first one not having the mic on when starting to speak, so that's the right way of starting every webinar. My name is Daniela Pigoso. I'm associate professor here at DTU, the Technical University of Denmark. I've been here for the last 10 years trying to understand how to support companies to become more sustainable. We do that from different points of view, and more recently, circular economy became a means for achieving sustainability. And this has also been one of my key focus areas in here. I'm originally from Brazil. I'm an environmental engineer, and right now I'm in the mechanical engineering department at DTU.
Thanks, Daniela. And my name is Tim McAloon. I'm a professor of sustainable product service systems here at DTU, where I've been for the last almost 24 years now. So working with sustainability, circular economy, eco-design, and everything that makes the world better from a technical and methodological perspective is my interest, at least. And I've been working in the field for many, many years. I have my PhD from Cranfield, and I started that in 1993, before it was really fashionable to be sustainable from a research or in particular from an industry perspective. So I've seen many waves, and the good news is that it's never been as interesting, as important to focus on sustainability as it is today. And we see circularity and circular economy as being a means to achieving sustainability. So that's what we're going to tell you about today. So I think that we'll be preaching to the choir if we spend too long telling you why we should be looking at going from a linear economy to a circular economy. And would also be preaching to the choir, I think, if we were to explain to you about all the potential that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and McKinsey and all the other great thinkers and consultants can tell us that are lying there in business potential from a circularity perspective. And this is a nice starting point when engaging industry from getting going to understand what is the potential for transitioning from a linear to a circular economy. Maybe a nicer way to describe that transition, or the need for the transition, comes from the European Commission. We've just started or piloted a course on circular economy, a 3-week course in a collaboration across the Eurotech collaboration, which is a number of universities across Europe, technical universities. And we had a guest lecture from the European Commission, and the commissioner there, he was telling us that the motivation to go for circular economy so massively in Europe has been the following. In 10 to 15 years, the world will, out of pure necessity, have to move into a circular way of doing business, a circular way of working, a circular way of thinking. And the decision was, how far ahead of that curve or behind the curve should Europe be? And the European Commission has decided that we should be ahead of that curve, and therefore the massive investment in circularity. So as a nice, you could say, background for why to transition to circular economy, apart from all of the sustainability arguments, which we tend to put out into the background when talking with business, although that's mostly, and I guess a lot of the people here today is where your heart beats the hardest, is to do circularity from a sustainability perspective. From all those backgrounds, what we did basically was to embark on a project some years ago now to help companies to see, now we're motivated, now we understand the reason or the drive to transition to circular economy, but where do we start, or how ready are we actually to start on that transition? And basically what we did, and this is a short history lesson of what we've been to you in this particular readiness area, is that we started actually 4 years ago with a project called MATCH, or some people call it MATCHA. And MATCH stood for Making the Transition to Circular Economy with a silent H. And the idea was also to match businesses up together with each other that are, you could say, looking for inspiration for how to get started with circular economy. That project finished in the beginning of 2021, and we focused on manufacturing companies. And since then, we've been, since the beginning of 21 until September last year, have been working on, you could say, a follow-on project, which is this ready2LOOP project, which we're going to introduce to you today. We're going to tell you much more about ready2LOOP and what that is focusing on in particular a little bit later. But before that, we're going to basically tell you about the basic background from a, you could say, a methodological perspective and a scientific perspective in the MATCH project. And then we're going to share with you some of the results from the MATCH project and why those results pointed towards the need for the project we're working on now, which is ready2LOOP. And just by way of a very, very small spoiler, ready2LOOP is expanding the view from the manufacturing company to the whole value chain of a manufacturing company. And that's where we're seeing the main focus of the ready2LOOP project. So we'll come back to that a little bit later. This as a webinar should be a teaser and a taster and a start of a discussion and a dialogue. So please butt in with any questions, maybe write them in the chat and we can take those up later. But also the dialogue at the end, we'll leave some time at the end of this so that you can ask all the questions you'd like to ask of us, and as an introduction to us and to the project. And at any time you can go and look at the website, which is on the bottom left of the slides here to follow along. And we're going to walk you through the website and the platform for ready2LOOP. So, and because this is a teaser, there's some things that you would maybe like to look at a little bit later, and we can share this link with you. Maybe Daniela can put the link to this article. If you want to listen, to read about the methodology behind the platform as to how we're basically building up the readiness assessment. Let me say something at the beginning about what we mean by readiness. So many companies talk about maturity, about doing things systematically, about doing things the same every time, about putting processes into system. But very few have actually been talking about readiness, which we see as coming before maturity. So readiness basically is bridging the gap between the good intention and maybe a couple of pilot projects and the actual systematic approach to maturity. And the readiness is seeing how do we actually bridge that gap and make sure that we go from the good intention to getting onto a systematic way of working. So that's why we're looking at readiness. Very, very briefly about the methodology and the science behind the scenes, as you could say. To create what we're going to present to you today, we have a load of different webinars, which we'll show you later, the link to those. But basically, we started those years ago by making sure that we took a scientific approach to see what readiness is and how do we actually develop an actually sound, theoretically sound approach to measuring readiness for transition to circular economy. And there we both came forth to a readiness scale, but also the dimensions and the aspects that we're going to show you very, very shortly. On the basis of that, we created a number of workshops with, first of all, experts internally within the university, with student groups, with other researchers, but also with industry players in different industry collections and you could say interest groups in Denmark. And then we start, of course, consolidated and improved the readiness scale, but also the readiness dimensions. After that, we made a high definition prototype of what you're about to see in a few minutes, and then tested out the logic and the whole flow of the platform, which today we're calling the ready2LOOP platform, and did a number of tests behind this. several workshops for beta testing before we actually launched the final platform, which up until a few months ago was called the Match Circular Economy Readiness Self-Assessment Tool, and the platform there. What did that result in? That was just the theory behind that, and the link coming in the chat there, so you can see the paper and how we did you could say the scientific methodology behind that. So we show that it's repeatable and objective, of course. What we basically arrived at in the platform, in the Match platform, was the following here. It's a readiness assessment profile that's part of the platform that we published and have been using. And this one you can see, if you're very, very trained in your eye, you'll see 8 hexagons. There's actually 9 because there's one linking them all together, but there's 8 hexagons here of main interest, starting in the middle. And these hexagons we're calling dimensions. So the one which is highlighted as an example here is organization. So how ready is your organization, the organization of the company, to transition to circular economy? Then if we go up to 12 o'clock, how ready is your company from a strategy and business model perspective? And then if we move around the clock, you could say around the life cycle from product and service development through manufacturing and operations, looking at how to use smart technology and IoT to understand how to track and trace to be ready to enable circular economy initiatives, to support and maintenance, and then take back and end of life, or end of use as we're calling it. And then the one around it, the big hexagon around, is from a market and policy perspective. So these are the 8 dimensions, cutting the story very, very short, that the platform is built up upon when we're looking at manufacturing companies. From a readiness perspective, what we then did was to create this scale of not ready to ready. And this is to strive for objective input data from those who we asked to, or we offer to test their readiness, all the way from the left-hand side, from we've not started on our journey to circular economy, or we're just understanding the potential, through executing pilot initiatives, all the way to, well, we actually have scaled up initiatives, or we're fully implemented in our company on a particular area. What we basically do here is that from all of these 8 dimensions that I showed you here, within these, we basically have a series of what we call aspects. And those aspects are formulated as questions. There's 30 aspects altogether, shared unevenly, but shared across these 8 dimensions. And for each of these 30 aspects, we're basically asking the question, how ready is your company along this scale? Let me show you on the dimension level, and Daniela is going to dip down in the data in a few minutes in terms of what we're seeing the readiness from the Match project, the project which closed the beginning of last year, where we're seeing where the temperature is in industry just now in manufacturing companies' readiness to transition to circular economy. But before that, just a glimpse as to how we're navigating companies around this readiness assessment. So here we can see one example looking at 12 o'clock here. It's now highlighted strategy and business model innovation. So if you go into this in the platform, it shows you that your readiness in terms of strategy and business model is measuring your capabilities to enable a long-term strategy to be developed, which is linked to the development of new business models that can effectively deliver enhanced competitiveness and growth. And when you go into there, there's a number of questions which are asking you, helping to take the temperature on your readiness there. When we run this normally as workshops with companies, often we do it within one company, and we bring 20, 30 different people from all around the company into a workshop. Other times we do it in workshops where we have 20 or 30 companies actually represented. And sometimes companies do it on their own, of course, and take upon themselves the task and the role of measuring readiness internally. And the idea is that they should ask as many colleagues as possible. The more colleagues that contribute to this readiness assessment, the more reliable the data are. And we've had, I think our record is that within one small company of around about 210, 220 staff members, they've had 83 of their staff go in all the way from the CEO and the owner to the shop floor workers in this manufacturing company to test their readiness and to see and to contribute to how they think their company is ready to make the transition. When we take it to a workshop, we always take some examples with us to show this is what we mean by strategy and business model. And the idea here, this particular example is from the city bike within Copenhagen, and how the business model has been put together to ensure that we have a business around, you could say, sustainable and circular transport within the smart last mile, for example. Another example could be to look at take back and end of life strategies. And what we do there is to tell the story and then let people go in and answer you could say the questionnaire, which is basically what it is, to see how ready they are. And then the story connected to take back and end of life or end of use strategies. We could take a company like Refurb, which is taking back 5,000 computers or telephones per month in Denmark, and basically refurbishing them and putting them back out onto the market after they've refurbished them. So bringing these examples is a way of, you could say, framing the minds of the users so that they know when we come to answer the questions on our readiness here, this is how we should answer the questions. Thanks. Here we just have a glimpse of a typical workshop situation. This is actually Bang & Olufsen, the high-end hi-fi manufacturer. And this was a workshop about 2 years ago where their staff members were going through and creating their first readiness profile here. And you can see they're not bored. They're very, very, very highly concentrated on the questions and looking very serious in the work here that they're doing. The answer, the comments at the end of this workshop were, why on earth didn't we have all of the top management to carry out this assessment? Because it's simply showing the need for us to be sharpening our readiness in different directions. And this is a really nice example of a company which actually, partly based upon the work that we did together with them here, has implemented design for circularity principles into their design and product development processes. And have just recently launched their first design for circularity product onto the market. So this is the type of a situation we often work in within industry. We run these through as so-called accelerator programs with companies. And these are normally short bursts of activity where we go very concentrated to help them to identify the 1 or 2 or 3 dimensions within those 8 dimensions that they should focus on, and then help them to get ready to make the transition. Then we leave them for a while to actually make the transition, and we come back later and say, what is your readiness now? So we have that delta measurement as well of their readiness to transition to circular economy. So that's the basic nuts and bolts of how the system works. Let me very, very quickly take you through a tour around the website, because as I said before, this webinar should be a sort of a teaser for you. I'm just going to put the website on here just now. And you can see that the main page here will give you an introduction to what this is. And you can click around the different aspects here, the different dimensions that I showed you an example of just before. You can see some of the cases that we have published from the companies. Here we have Bang & Olufsen that you saw in the picture just before. And you can read about the case, what they did, which of the dimensions they focused on, and if you go all the way to the end, you can see which of the tools that they have used that we provided for them as well. You can look at, you can read about circular readiness, or what a transition path is, what it means to make the transition to circularity. And then in our knowledge universe, you can look at the tools we have, and we've provided basically over 100 tools for mapping and aiding that transition to circular economy. And if we were just to take an arbitrary tool, they're basically classified as to your readiness level, what type of a tool level in the organization it is, whether it's a strategic, a tactical, or an operational tool. In terms of the participation level, is it an individual or team tool? And what phase of the transition path you'd like to use this in. And we've basically classified each tool, and later on we can help the companies to filter to say, we want something which is for just starting, but also getting ready to, for example, explore strategic opportunities this tool would be suitable. So it's a way of filtering the different tools. We have over 100 of those tools on the platform. And as you are guided through the readiness assessment, it helps you to make the choices and decisions there. And then we have a number of cases and a library of interesting external material, and then webinars, which Daniela is going to come back to a little bit later, that you can see the webinars that we've basically created that you can learn more about the project. Here, this button here, My Loop, this is basically the readiness profile. So within here, you can see I'm logged in as myself, and you can go in, you can start an assessment, you can see your results, you can do benchmarking, and you can also start to make your transition path. So you're welcome to go in and play around with the tool. You can register yourselves if you're from a university as the university. You won't be able to see all of the benchmarking data because that's for companies only. But you'll be able to see the tools if you fill in a readiness assessment, and you'll be able to play around with the different dimensions and aspects of circularity if you want to compare that with the paper that we shared with you just before. This is just a collection of some of the companies that we've been working with. So they're mainly manufacturing companies. And as I mentioned before, the match project that came before ready2loop was focused on manufacturing companies, but they're of all different types and shapes and sizes. It's a Danish project, so it was focused on Danish companies. But nevertheless, we have an Adidas there, we have a Steelcase there, we have Enso, we have Equinor, and all different types of companies from many different countries as well. And Daniela's going to dig down into the details, into the figures about what types of results that we're seeing from the ready2loop platform. So over to you, Daniela.
Thank you. And of course, our main goal with this project is to support companies in making this transition from a linear to a circular economy. But a secondary benefit that we get with the project is actually to have a quite good understanding about how industry in general is making this transition, and also how we can further support them with new knowledge areas, with new tools, with new approaches on the basis of their gaps, but also on the basis of their strengths. And what I want to do with you just now is to really dig down into this data with all the different companies that we have in the platform. We are going to start overall looking in terms of how many companies we have, from which sectors, and also how they are spread around the world. Then we are going to focus on the overall readiness of those companies by looking to different types of companies. For example, how does business-to-business companies compare in relation to business-to-consumer companies? Then we're going to go and have a look into all the different dimensions that Tim just described to you, to try to understand how readiness change in relation to those dimensions across different sectors. And then we're going to talk about how to further have access to the data dimension by dimension. So let's start with the first overall vision. So right now in the platform, we have over 1,000 users, and they are representing more than 500 different companies in total. If we look into the sectors that those companies are representing, Tim mentioned that we are mostly focusing on manufacturing companies in the match project. You're going to hear more about the extended scope in ready2loop. But right now in the platform, we have 16 different sectors being represented. Here you can see a list of all the different aggregated sectors. And we can see by looking into that, the interest of sectors for circular economy. So if you look here, we see the top 3 are manufacture of electronics, manufacture of chemistry, plastics, and refined mineral oils, and also manufacturing of furniture. But we can also see the concept of circular economy spreading over many different sectors over time, which is quite exciting and quite interesting to see as well. If we look from a country distribution, Tim mentioned that our main target country in the project has been Denmark. And without doing any further advertisement, we actually have in the platform today more than 40 different countries across all the 5 continents. And that is quite interesting for us to see as well, that companies in Europe, in North America, in South America, in Asia, they're all trying to understand how to become more ready when making this transition to a circular economy. Another interesting thing that we see is who are the people in those companies actually engaging in this assessment. And what we see here is that we still have a majority of sustainability related people inside the organizations. But what's really interesting here is that there are actually many other functions that are also trying to understand how to bring circularity to their day-to-day activities. So we see here the top three, in addition to sustainability, are research and development, product design and development, and also strategic planning. And we see a quite good coverage of supply chain, sales, manufacturing, marketing, and so on and so forth. But it's become even more interesting to see if you look into a time distribution in the platform. What we can actually see is that in the very beginning, we have in 17, we have very few different functions being represented in the platform. But if you look more recently, we actually are starting to get more and more different people engaging, which is actually showing that circular economy is actually emerging from the sustainability department, but is actually getting traction in many other different parts of the organizations. The last element that I want to show you in this dashboard is the types of companies that we have engaged. So we see here that the large majority of the companies are business to business, followed by business to consumer companies, but not that many yet in relation to business to government. And that's despite all of the initiatives that we see emerging in many different countries and also in Sweden in relation to green public procurement. So our expectation is that in the near future, we're going to have more business to government companies focusing on circular economy as well. And then in terms of size of companies, the majority of the companies in the platform today, they are large companies. But we also see SMEs being represented in the platform. And if we stack them together, it's actually quite a high number of SMEs that are looking to understand how to make this transition to a circular economy. But you might be asking yourself, how ready are they then in the platform? And the readiness scale that we have in the platform goes from 0 to 150. The number per se doesn't mean much individually, but it of course helps you to see evolution over time and to see how you compare with other companies that we have in the database. So what we see today is that the average readiness across all of those different companies that I mentioned to you is about 62, which means that they've moved away from understanding what is the potential to actually start either to plan pilot projects or to already implement pilot projects in relation to circular economy initiatives. And what we can see here as well is that the sectors with the highest readiness are the building materials and products, the food and beverage, and also electronics. And if you look down in the list, we see the two sectors with the lowest readiness so far are metal and metal products and pharmaceutical preparations. Another interesting thing to see is the coverage of different skills that we are having in the platform. And right now we have about 50% of the skills that are necessary for the circular economy transition being represented. And what's actually interesting is to see that the level of agreement between different people from different functions when answering the readiness assessment for their own specific company is quite high. So in average, it's on 2.6 in a scale from 1 to 3, 3 being the maximum agreement. And this is measured on the basis of the standard deviation. But what's really interesting in this map, for me at least, is to see how readiness change in relation to the size of companies? And what we can see here is that actually the very small companies or the very large ones are the ones with highest readiness, with micro companies with less than 10 employees with the highest readiness overall. We can maybe have a discussion later on to understand why that happens and why is it easier for very small companies to actually be more ready for circular economy. If we move forward, I just want to highlight how that would look like for B2C companies as well, so business to consumer companies. What we see here is an even higher level of agreement. We see that small companies in that case are the ones with the highest readiness. And we see the top scoring sectors as being the motor vehicles and also machinery. Good. Let's move forward. Let's now go from understanding the overall readiness in the Swedish industry. I guess there are many Swedes joining us today, or at least people in Sweden, in the event being organized by KTH. What we actually see here is that Swedish companies have a higher overall readiness when compared to the entire sample that we have in the platform. So it's right in the middle of our scale, 77 out of 150. And what we see here is that sectors with the highest readiness in Sweden are furniture or building materials, food and beverage, and then also furniture and wood and paper, which is quite interesting considering the areas that you are quite strong in Sweden as well. We see the top agreement level. I think it can also be connected to the culture in the country of being really consensus driven and really sharing information across different employees in the companies. And what's really interesting here is that differently from the average that we have in the sample, the large companies in Sweden are the ones with the highest readiness. And we can, of course, this is not an interactive map, but we have all of that interactive and we can click in the bubbles and see for different countries, for instance, how that would look like as well. Let's now move forward and let's have a look of the overall readiness across the 8 dimensions that we have in the Ready2LOOP platform. What we can see here is that we actually have a quite even readiness across the different dimensions. The scale here is from 0 to 1. And what it means is that in all the different dimensions in average, we are already piloting initiatives for circular economy. And we were in an event of the World Circular Economy Forum in Helsinki a couple of years ago. And they were actually saying about the need of going from pilot projects in circular economy to scale up implementation. And this data actually backs up this statement. We still have too many pilots, but we see very little scale up of those pilots into real business that can actually make a higher impact into the transition to circular economy. But here we see the 2 dimensions with the highest readiness are manufacturing and value chain, and then also strategy and business model, followed by product and service innovation. So we see that for manufacturing companies, those 3 areas seems to be the ones where they have a stronger focus for circular economy implementation. Now, let's have a look into a couple of sectors to see how different it goes from one sector to the next. This first one that I'm focusing on is machinery. So what we see here is that they have a slightly higher readiness in all the dimensions in relation to the average in all the different sectors. And we can also see that the dimensions with the strongest readiness are slightly different. So they are focusing quite a lot into technology and data and trying to understand how to use sensors, digitalization, IoT, and big data to further support their circular economy initiatives. They are also focusing quite a lot on use, support, and maintenance. So how to extend the overall lifetime of the products by providing services during the use phase that will help to achieve a higher utilization of the resources they are putting into those products. And then, of course, connected to that, product and service innovation is really important. So how do we design products that can be remanufactured, how we design products that can be serviced during the use phase, and potentially how can we design products that actually minimize the overall consumption of materials as well. And then another sector that is quite different from machinery is food and beverage. This is actually one of the sectors with the highest readiness across all the different sectors that we have in the platform today. And we see a quite different focus. Of course, the products are very different. So in here, we see that the biggest areas are manufacturing and value chain. So how can we become more effective in producing our products, but at the same time, how we can engage and make partnerships with different players in the value chain that will help us to implement circularity in a faster way. How do we change our strategy and our business model to actually integrate circularity from the very beginning, and how we allocate resources to it and really commit to the transition? And then finally, take back and end of life is also a very important area, especially in relation to packaging. We know that in the EU, there's a quite strong focus just now to minimize single-use packaging. And of course, this sector specifically is directly being impacted by those type of regulations. Moving a little bit further again, now we just had an overview on all the dimensions. If we look within each dimension, we can also find some interesting data in relation to how the different aspects or the different questions relate to each other. And then again, we can filter in relation to type, to size, to sector, and so forth. I don't have time to go through all of those details today together with you, but I want to invite you to watch our webinars that we actually went dimension by dimension, exploring the strengths and the gaps of the companies that we have in the database. You can access them through the website that Tim shared with you as well. And if you want to have a longer introduction about the project and actually try to find some additional insights from, in addition to what we are presenting today, the Intro to Match workshop can be a really good place to go as well. So I feel a little bit like the weather person today, but let's now move forward and try to understand how Match is evolving from only looking to manufacturing companies to ready2loop that is expanding along the entire value chain.
Thanks, Daniela. So yeah, the good thing about the weather analogy is that it's looking slightly cloudy, but it's getting brighter as we go along for all the dimensions. So, and in whatever field we're looking at as well, there's a lot of attention on this. I'm going to use the last 6 minutes of the time that we proposed that we would use before the Q&A session to tell you about what's going to happen from now, because the data we just showed you is slightly updated from when we officially closed the Match project. But now we're expanding in a number of different directions, which we'd like you to introduce you to. And I gave you a hint about this at the beginning when talking about Match versus ready2loop. So basically what Daniela just presented to you on those different charts and small introductions or small deep dives, you could say, into the data is based upon the Match platform, which is this these 8 readiness dimensions and the 30 aspects within those. And what I'm going to show you now is that it's sort of a you could say a metaphor for what we're doing in ready2loop is to say we're going to actually expand the platform now in a number of different directions, actually to have the equivalent of 7 Match projects on top of what we have, using the same logic, using the same type of way of engaging, using the same guidance as well for companies to plan their transition paths, to engage on the actual transitions, and also to use the tools which we're going to be making available for them. It may not be that there'll be 7 different colored diamonds like this or hexagons. They may have different shapes, because depending on which level and which layer we're going to be working on, there'll be different dimensions. Some will be the same. We guess that organization and business model may be the same, but depending on where we're looking, and I'm going to introduce you to where we're looking in a second, there will be the need for different dimensions and of course different aspects. So basically, the need that we saw for Ready2Loop came from the following. We saw that these over 500 companies are in transition, which is really great, and they've made their start. And of course, there's many, many more. These are just the ones on our platform. But actually, only 25% of these companies have even begun to start thinking about collaborating across the value chain. And you can read in countless articles around the world that a circular economy only becomes an actuality if we think in the whole value chain. And yet only 25% have even begun thinking about it, begun working on it, not to mention actually think they have any form of control over their value chain at all. So this is where we came with the argumentation for we need now to support companies in their transition, yes, in manufacturing companies, but from that point of departure, also to start to understand how their value chain and the readiness of their value chain is as well. So what we've basically done, if you take those hexagons I showed you in the different colors there, is to say manufacturers is important, but we need to look at raw materials manufacturers. We need to look at component manufacturers, through the Match platform to manufacturers, to logistics companies, to retailers, all the way through to the consumers of the products and the systems that we're actually manufacturing, through at the end of use or end of life to value recovery, so we actually close that cycle. So circular economy only arises when there is a cooperation across the whole value chain. So that's basically what we're looking at in the Ready2Loop platform, is to keep the solid foundation we've built in Match, but to build these 6 new layers on top, and also to build the connections between and across the different layers. Because one thing is to test your own readiness and to look internally in your organization. The other one is to start to collaborate up and down the value chain. What we're basically doing, the product is funded again by the Danish Industry Foundation. DTU is the sole grant owner for the project. But this time, we're really going to be doing a lot of accelerator projects. We have 2 consultancy companies whose job is that we've certified those companies to be Ready2Loop accelerator consultancies. And they've promised that 42 accelerator projects per consultancy will be carried out within the next 4 years across the different value chain layers there. We have a very, very solid backing group and steering committee with the Confederation of Danish Industry behind us, the Danish Business Authority, and then you could say a research and development platform called MADE, the Manufacturing Academy of Denmark. They're our steering group and giving us really great support to get in touch with all the right different stakeholders on every single one of the layers of the value chain layers that we're working on. How we're doing it? Well, we start with the foundation of the Match platform, which is what the consultants are working on just now to get used to that and to bring out the platform to some new companies and make accelerators with them. And in the meantime, we have colleagues, in particular, a very prized colleague, I think I saw on the delegates list as well today, Tyler, one of our postdocs, looking at developing the content and the scientific approach to the content for first raw materials, then component manufacturers, which we'll launch this year. Next year, we'll take logistics and retailers. And then in 24, consumers and value recovery organizations. So the platform will basically develop over time to encompass and incorporate these different value chain layers as time goes on. This is an open invitation to you to look around, to play with the platform. I'm not sure how many manufacturing companies or any of the value chain partners are in the webinar today. Maybe you're all researchers, but maybe you have contacts to or consultants, maybe have a contact to some relevant organizations who'd like to try this out. It's still a Danish project, but we're also developing the platform internationally as time goes on as well. And we've had a lot of interest from many different countries around the world, where we're also going to be expanding the platform in order to be able to provide even more reliable and compelling data by the more companies and the more people within those companies that are contributing to the platform, the more useful the data become. And that's the idea with the platform, is to make something where we can guide individual companies, guide value chains, but also to show where the gaps and where the opportunities are to actually really do something innovative within circularity and go beyond that pilot project into full implementation. So that was what we had to share with you on Ready2Loop, with the background of Match and with the plans of where we're going, built upon what we think are really exciting data insights that we've already received from the Match platform, from the 500 plus companies, and wanting now to go to the tens of thousands of companies is basically our aim, to become even more interesting and even more objective when we say that this is how Swedish industry looks. The more companies that are in there, the more we can be certain about our statements about the data. So we hope that you've been inspired by the presentation, by this little webinar. We hope there's some questions. I can see there's some in the chat. And we're going to open the last minutes, as we promised here. We went 2 minutes over for a Q&A. And Syed, maybe you want to guide us through the Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much, Tim and Daniela, for a very interesting webinar and really interesting data and insights from that data. And I think it's just the start. I mean, more and more companies, when they will enter their data, and we will have much more concrete results from this platform. And we are inviting the Swedish industry to fill in their data, and we have already sent invitations for this circular readiness masterclass as well. So hopefully we will have a lot of Swedish industry registering for this webinar soon. And yes, we have some questions. So I will just, they have written the questions, but I will call your name, and maybe you can ask the question directly to them. So Beatrice, you have the question.
Can you hear me? Yeah, well, I mean, I had several, so just because some of them were answered meanwhile, because I thought that the process was kind of like very individual, so as to say. And my point of view is that to encourage circular economy, collaboration is critical. So that's why I was asking if you were thinking of a multidisciplinary, like industrial symbiosis. Mm-hmm. But that's what you've said, that you kind of want them to try to collaborate more. Yeah. And also the fact that they're free. I mean, I'm already inside the website, so I know which ones are free and which ones are not. But this one is a question I had. Because in order to incentivize these companies, to become more circular, or to go through these assessment, I was wondering if you were going to provide them with a label or a certificate in the sense of their sustainability performance, and whether you're going to map them in the sense of so that they can see from all the 500 plus companies that you've assessed what their position is, so that they're kind of encouraged to get better, right? To try and beat their competitors, so as to say. Mm-hmm. And then the other question was in regards to the methyl and pharmaceutical sector, that you said that they are the least prepared. And my question was whether this has to do with the fact that obviously those materials are pretty hazardous and toxic full. So if the reason was that there's a lack of recycling options currently to recover this material in a sustainable way. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. It was great.
You're welcome. I heard two unanswered questions in there. One about the certification and one about the pharmaceutical sector. And maybe I'll take the certification one while Daniela prepares the answer for the other. So so in terms of the certification or labeling, so we've thought about this in great detail, in fact, and about when and how to certify and who to certify also. What we've achieved so far is an agreement with ourselves that we begin by certifying consultants to facilitate this. And this is really important. Anybody can use the platform, and all the tools are there to be used. And we'd rather that people don't steal them en masse and put them onto that platform, but simply go onto the platform often and use them. We'd really like to have that. And the reason we'd like to keep them on the platform is that we're updating them all the time. And as the platform grows from these different value chain layers, we're going to be linking the tools back and forth to different areas and giving different contextual tweaks and improvements to them. So that's why it would be nice if you can keep referring to the tools, but use them where they are. And as long as you have a login, you can use them there. But the certification part is to help consultancies to say, we've been trained in facilitating the process of readiness or readiness assessment, but also facilitating the process of these transition paths. And we have a process that we've built up, and we've been developing that together with the two consultants that I showed at the end there. So the certification will first of all go on to the consultants. Later on, we may do a certification of users, so you can put a badge on your company website or what have you. That is a clear way forward. We need to make sure that we have a good enough development in the platform that we can before we can start to make that certification. But the considerations you mentioned have been up in discussion for quite a lot within our group. So you're thinking along the lines that we've been thinking. And then over to you, Daniela, for the other question.
Yeah, I would say that what's really particular about the pharmaceutical industry is the very strict requirements they need to fulfill. And that's connected to standards, to policy on what is even legal to do in terms of end of use or end of life products. So on the basis of the data that we have today, it seems that the biggest challenge is on the policy and market dimension first, to show that it's safe, for example, to use recycled materials or to recycle products that can actually have some body fluids or something into them, because from a technological point of view, it seems to be going the right direction. And then the second biggest challenge is that if you look at the medical industry, it's been going towards single-use products over the last many years. There's some very interesting research showing how we actually have evolved from using products or devices several times, like the metal ones, to changing them to single-use plastics, and more recently, even single-use metals. So I think that this change of paradigm into the medical industry is also important, as we cannot continue going with single-use products for too long.
Great. Then we have next question, Ishan. Maybe you can ask the question directly.
Hi, yeah, thank you. It was a nice presentation and really good project to look into. I will definitely check it out. But my just query was, so how are you looking into that? Any transition which we are calling here circular are also sustainable? Is there a way to look at it, or is it a part of your project or not?
Yeah, so your question is really nicely formulated. Is circularity more sustainable all the time? And the answer to that is no. And then the answer to, are we looking at that? So yes, we are, on the way in which we facilitate particularly the discussions and the communication with the companies that we're engaging with on the project. We take very, very detailed discussions with those in the accelerator projects about, well, are we just doing circularity for circularity's sake, or how do we actually see the potential to make sure that we're doing this for a sustainability reason, and how do we make sure that any changes or any implementations we make from a circularity perspective are actually contributing to sustainability and not backfiring in some way. You could say that we have, support-wise for that, we have a number of mechanisms internally in our group. We have some help in terms of actually circularity and sustainability indicators. So indicators that help us, what we call them leading indicators, to help that we make, we include the right measures to hopefully ensure that we're doing the right thing from a sustainability perspective. And then Daniela's heading a group up just now within our group on looking at rebound effects, and in particular, the good intentions we have. How do we make sure that they don't actually rebound on us or backfire? And they have you could say, we bring that into the project, some of those less formally into the Ready2LOOP project. But when we're facilitating, we're making sure that that is becoming part of the equation. And it's also why we're certifying the consultants, so that we also make sure that they're aware of, you could say, of the boundaries to circularity, that we don't go down some crazy tangent that is super circular, but not at all sustainable. And that's another reason for us wanting to certify.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you.
Welcome, Michelle.
We have 4 minutes, so maybe I can rephrase the question one of our colleagues asked in the chat. And this question is actually very important, that what data you are getting, is that data really representative of the industry? Because maybe this is the case that only those companies which have some pilot, are already aware of the circular economy, they are entering the data in the system. And there is a large population maybe which is still, not even aware of these things. So yeah, if you want to comment on that, if it is really a representative data.
Yeah, so I would say that within the company, it is representative, because we engage many different people from different functions. And we have some indicators showing how much we can trust the data for this one company. But of course, if you look in average for all the different countries, it's of course not representative, but it's the best that we have today. And our goal, as Tim just mentioned, is to go from 1,000 companies to hundreds of thousands of companies in the next few years. And the more companies that we have in the platform, the more value we have in the data for benchmarking, for research purposes, for policy making, and so on and so forth. And we are not aware of any other similar platform or way of measuring circular economy readiness with so many different companies involved as well. And what we see, if you look over time, in relation to the types of companies that are engaging, I would say they, of course, need to know at least what the word circular economy is. Otherwise, they will probably not do the assessment. But if we actually look into the readiness that they have, many of the companies, they have a very low readiness. So, and that's exactly the type of company that we want to attract, the ones that have heard about circular economy, but they don't really know whether it is something for them, if there's a potential, and also how ready they are to actually continuing, and how to prioritize, how to move forward. Because I mean, there are so many different things that you can do, but it's really important to find what are the areas to focus on to start with.
Yeah, and you can say there is a self-selection bias, of course. And we're not claiming that this is a picture of the world. It's a picture of the companies that have, as Daniela just mentioned, have decided to make this measurement. If you want to look at the picture of the world, you can look at the different studies done by, for example, Circular Economy, who's saying that the world is 8-point-something% circular. They're looking externally at other aspects, but from within here, the circularity is on a company basis and benchmarking with companies on like bases. The last thing I forgot to mention is that if you are a manufacturing company, you can, in the current platform, you can go in and do both internal and external benchmarks within the tool. And what that basically does is, as long as there's companies within the filters that you make, you can filter on the type of the company, whether it's B2B, B2C, B2G. You can filter on the size, you can filter on geography, and you can filter on aggregated sectors. We've made 12 aggregations of the sectors, not the very small details that Daniela showed you, but more aggregated high-level clusters. And within those 4 dimensions, you can filter and play with it if you're a manufacturing company. But it will only show you if there's more than 5 companies with those criteria, so as to show you something which is similar and comparable, but also retain the anonymity, of course, of the companies. And that gives a nice idea as to what are other companies within the field doing there in terms of the level of the circularity.
Great.
Daniela has answered the other questions in the chat. Nice.
Thank you very much. And yes, Daniela has answered the questions in the chat. And of course, you can contact them directly. You can write them email if you have more questions. But now we are short of time. So thank you very much again, Tim and Daniela. It was really interesting listening to the webinar and all the information about the Ready2LOOP platform. So thanks again.
Thanks for joining, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.